Just a disclaimer before I get into this one. Um, I've noticed that apologists for sort of groups I'll be talking about tend to have a duality of thinking. They tend to take the view that if you criticize the sort of groups I'll be talking about, then you're a climate change denier or you don't care about the earth and other such sweeping claims. It's a very ignorant way to look at it because Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, Insulate Britain have turned the vast majority against them. Absolutely, the majority is against them. There are people who support them who wouldn't necessarily. Well, I think actually the majority that support them wouldn't be among the hardcore activists. So when you really factor it down, you have a hardcore group of activists, maybe I would estimate perhaps nationwide, a couple of hundred at most. And then let's say there's a few thousand more supporters. I'll even be generous and say 100,000, right? But we are a country of 68 million. So if they were a political party, they would be minuscule. In fact, they did stand in the general election, and in every case, they got defeated. So that shows they have no democratic mandate. Not even one seat. Okay, so that in itself is telling. But the disclaimer I want to make is that just because people criticize these groups doesn't make them oblivious to some of the things going on in the world. As I speak, the US is recovering from Hurricane Helene, which is the deadliest in America since Katrina, some 19 years ago. Um, in Nepal, there's been deadly floods. I was just watching a video on the deadly floods in Germany in 2021, and there's many other examples. Um, I think it would be naive to argue that with an ever increasing global population, that the resources we're taking from the planet aren't having some effect. I mean, if we look at plastic waste, that's a massive issue. I will say this though, some of the things these groups are demanding, even if the government agreed that everything they were demanding, like a complete halt in everything that is oil based, it's utterly, utterly, utterly unrealistic and unworkable. But even if we done that, and it would destroy the economy and bring us back to, a pre-industrial situation, it's just not feasible. Even if we done that, which is never going to happen, that would make little difference to the global situation because Britain is not in the top five major carbon producers. I don't know where it ranks, but we certainly are in the very top fraction. So it would make very little difference to the global output. And it's often been said, why don't these people go to China or Russia or another totalitarian state? Well, it's obvious. They would be arrested and thrown in prison immediately. There'd be no negotiations. There'd be no. It would just be. But the point I'm making is, if you look at what they've targeted over the past 5 years, it isn't the big energy companies. I don't like Greenpeace, but at least they target the right people. Okay, I don't like them. I think their stunts are infantile, and I don't think it's particularly productive. But at least Greenpeace don't mess with the public. I'll give them that. That's all I'll give them because they support the other groups. But Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain, utterly, utterly obnoxious. And I stand by my use of the word extremist because they're basically saying the ends justify the means. We can do whatever we like because we're fighting for the earth. Now, that's extremist thinking. That is the mindset of a terrorist. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that. Um, and what's striking about them, there's a number of things that are striking, but one of the things that's striking is a complete and utter lack of remorse. Their extreme arrogance. What we're doing is right. And they know it's illegal. They fully admit that they're breaking the law, but they've no remorse. Now, if you look at the rioters over the summer, um, a lot of them got hefty prison sentences, and rightly so. I've been outspoken in that. I think it's good that they did. But some of them, you do notice that some of them kind of made groveling excuses. And I think in some cases it's no excuse, but they were drunk and they done something stupid. I do think in some of those cases that's what happened. Um, and in some cases they express their remorse and all the rest of it. I still think the book should have been thrown at them because those scenes of violence were repugnant. But if you look at Just Stop Oil activists, criminals, when they're on trial, it's an extreme lack of remorse, and that's striking. I'm just going to read out a piece from The Guardian. I'm going to try and abridge this because I have space issues on my computer, but this is the piece. And I'm just reading this out, or parts of it, um, to show that they're still active, but I do wonder if their time is up, and I'll come to that afterwards. This report's by Damien Gale, and it's from a couple of days ago. Climate activist threw tomato soup over two sunflower paintings by Vincent van Gogh yesterday, just an hour after two others were jailed for almost the same protest action in 2022. Before I continue, one of these activists is very well known, Phoebe Plummer. She's become infamous within Just Stop Oil. Now, she's pretty distinctive. She's got pink hair. She's a young woman, she's distinctive, and they wear those silly t-shirts. Even if they don't wear the t-shirts, she should be blacklisted from every gallery in the country. So I would say the National Gallery needs to check its security. She shouldn't even be allowed to get in the door, never mind in the main gallery rooms. If that means putting someone on full opening hours, then they need to take that measure because these priceless paintings, sorry, I'm interrupting the flow, but this has to be said, they are protected by glass, but that doesn't protect the frame, and the frames themselves are quite expensive. Indeed, that was what, yeah, on the previous, no, this is this protest, bear with me. The protest took place almost exactly an hour after Plumber 23 was sentenced to 2 years in prison for causing an estimated £10,000 worth of damage to the frame of Sunflowers 1888. Her co-defendant, Holland 22, got 20 months for the same offence. And I know in France, their sister groups there have tried to target the Mona Lisa. And in Germany and in Italy, they've done it as well, because it's not just Britain. Now, this is a very important point. Passing sentence at Southwark Crown Court yesterday, the judge, Christopher Heher, that's Hehir, told them, "You two simply had no right to do what you did to Sunflowers, and your arrogance in thinking otherwise deserves the strongest condemnation. The pair of you came within the thickness of a pane of glass of irreparably damaging or even destroying this priceless treasure, and that must be reflected in the sentence I pass." Now, it's refreshing to see a judge being so blunt, because very often when judges pass sentences, they're very judicial and diplomatic and sensitive, and I think sometimes judges need to be, frankly, a bit more human, a bit more blunt in the way they speak. So I'm pleased this judge is telling him exactly what he thinks. Certainly, if I was presiding, I would tell him that. Though there is a dubious part that Plummer gave a 20-minute address to the judge in mitigation, citing Emmeline Pankhurst, Gandhi, and Nelson Mandela as examples of criminalised people criminalised while fighting for justice. I'll come to that point in a minute. Phil Green, another one of the invaders of this place, I'm very reluctant to call them activists, claim future generations will regard these prisoners of conscience to be on the right side of history. Um, and it has to be said, the UN has condemned European countries for targeting climate activists. But here's the thing, they are violating the human rights of others. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that. Because when they get onto a motorway, they may not be throwing, this whole thing about peaceful protests is thrown around. Well, they may not be throwing Molotov cocktails and throwing punches at the police or setting fires to hotels with people inside, but they are messing with people's lives. People have had medical conditions exacerbated by what they've done. One woman had a stroke in one of the tailbacks that they caused. A man couldn't go to his own father's funeral. That's the sort of things they're doing to people. People are missing weddings, funerals, job interviews, business appointments, all sorts of things. Imagine someone has been working all year round and they finally get a holiday and they go to the airport only for them to miss their flight because of one of these stunts. It's utterly disgusting what they do, and they deserve all the contempt they get. But it's this kind of narcissism, and I'm not saying that as a formal diagnosis, right? I'm not a psychologist, but I think it's kind of narcissistic. It just makes me think this looks like narcissistic behavior to to have such a contempt for the public and then think they're doing it for the public's good. This extreme vanity. They really compare themselves to Nelson Mandela. Well, it's true that the ANC engaged in civil disobedience, and actually worse, they engaged in acts of terrorism, but there is a difference. The vast majority of South Africans, which was majority black, supported the ANC. That's a difference. As for the suffragettes, that one, it's probably for another video, but the peak of militant suffragette activity was 1913. The suffragettes then were extremely unpopular. They were planting bombs in letterboxes, etc. Women got the full vote in 1928. I think generally, not just eco zealots, but generally people need to stop hailing those militant suffragettes as the ones who got votes for women. I would argue it was a more moderate but equally passionate stances of people like Millicent Fawcett, who got votes for women as well as the changing labour market of World War One, among other things. I am not convinced that putting bombs in letterboxes got women the vote, and I think we need to stop this distortion, or at least evaluate it. I'm not a professional historian, but I just think that's dubious. Um, and I think it's contemptible that eco extremists honestly put themselves in the same bracket as a man like Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years in prison, a lot of it solitary confinement, and then went on to be a head of state. It's just, it shows their sheer arrogance. And by the way, he prevented civil war in South Africa. He had his flaws, but he was a great man. These people are not great, they're idiots. And I don't see anything productive that they are doing. They have failed to get wider public support in 5 years of holding the public hostage. Um, I would even say, if you look at Greenpeace is less obnoxious than these groups in the sense that they don't target the public in the same way. But Greenpeace, by that stunt at Rishi Sunak's house last year, the government cancelled a meeting they were going to have with them. So when are eco groups going to realise these stunts do not work? All they do is aggravate the public. And you can tell them that till you're blue in the face, but they're so entrenched in their arrogance and failure to introspect that they just convince themselves, well, I can do whatever I'm like. I could do whatever I like because it's for the planet. That's extremism. The ends justifies the means no matter what. Um, but the good news is there is far less media attention on them now. And I think that the excessive media attention was one of the things that galvanized them. So I think maybe they have had their day. I'm not saying they've totally stopped. They're still obviously engaging in these stunts, but the sentences are getting heftier. The police, rightly, in my view, came under a lot of criticism for their softly, softly approach, but they've got a bit more robust recently. Um, Less media attention, more robust police response. Um, I think maybe they've had their peak. I sincerely hope so, because what they've done to the British public and the French and German and Italian public over the last few years is disgusting. They're not heroes. They are selfish, egotistical exhibitionists. Um, they can delude themselves as much as they want that they're doing it for the planet. But vandalizing a painting isn't helping poor families in Bangladesh or Ethiopia. It just isn't. Shame on all of them, and especially shame on their leaders.